I had this ridiculous idea that surprising my husband Ethan, who had been working out of town in Portland for months, would somehow bring a spark back to our marriage, so I drove over 300 miles from Seattle. Clenching the ultrasound report like a precious secret I couldn't wait to share, I was pregnant. Finally, after 2 exhausting years of trying and failing, after being poked and prodded by doctors and blamed by his mother in subtle ways. And I thought maybe this tiny heartbeat would change. Everything but what greeted me wasn't surprise or joy. It was a pair of high heels that weren't mine by the door, a woman's handbag on the entry shelf I didn't recognize, and a haunting silence from the bedroom that only deepened the pit in my stomach as I stepped in. I knew before I even opened the door, but knowing didn't soften the blow. There he was, Ethan Carter, my husband of 6 years. Lying on our bed with a girl curled against him like some rom-com cliché come to life, and when he saw me, his reaction wasn't guilt or panic, it was indifference, like I'd interrupted something mildly inconvenient, and then he had the audacity to say, "Ava, don't make this hard on her. This is my fault. I'll take responsibility," like he was some damn nobleman caught in a harmless mistake instead of a lying cheat. I stared at him, the air sucked out of my lungs, and the words came out trembling. "Do you even know what you're doing?" But even as I asked, I already knew he did. Of course, he died, wasn't confused. He wasn't caught up in the moment. He'd chosen this, every part of this, from the girl whose name I didn't care to know to the way he pulled her behind him protectively like I was the villain here, and when I asked for her name, he shielded her like I'd aimed a weapon at her chest, muttering, "Don't be like that, Ava. She's not the problem," and then handed her one of my still-tagged dresses from our closet and zipped it up for her with a tenderness he hadn't shown me in months. I stood there on the balcony afterward, the hot summer wind hitting my face as I watched the girl leave through the glass door, and my heart was numb, not shattered, not burning, just still, like it had frozen mid-beat. And Ethan came back inside and said we needed to talk, lit a cigarette like we were in some noir drama, and told me that he was tired, that he hadn't felt alive in a long time until he met Chloe Morgan, that our marriage had been dead for years, and it was time to let go before we ended up resenting each other, that it would be better for both of us. And when he said, "Let's just end it, Ava. There are no kids yet, we can walk away clean," I almost laughed, because I was carrying his child and he didn't even know, but I didn't tell him, not then, because what was the point? The man I married was gone, replaced by someone who smiled while talking about his new love like he wasn't breaking me piece by piece. Someone who didn't even notice the way my hands were shaking or that my fingernails had dug crescent moons into my palms just to keep from crying. He grabbed his car keys and left like nothing happened, told me to think about the divorce and that he'd try to compensate me like this was some corporate transaction, and I stood there in our living room, no, his living room, now feeling like an intruder in a life I built with him, with my sleepwear gone from the closet and my skincare products vanished from the bathroom, like I'd been erased and replaced, and I didn't cry. Not even when I turned off the recording I'd started when I walked in, or when I snapped a few photos of the place as evidence, or even when I sat back in my car with the ultrasound report in the passenger seat, untouched, unopened, meaningless now. Earlier that morning I'd left the hospital buzzing with hope, calling him 3 times and telling myself maybe he was just busy, maybe he'd call back later, but no, he was busy all right, just not with work. I thought of everything I'd overlooked, how he stopped coming home regularly, how he used to drive back every weekend and then it became every 2 weeks, then once a month, then never, how he used to text me every morning and night and now barely replied, and how I'd let it all slide because I thought love was supposed to be patient, to endure, but what a joke, because here I was, pregnant and alone, carrying the surprise he'd never receive and facing the future he just walked out of, and I didn't go home that night. I checked into a hotel, showered off the day like it was a bad dream, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling until the phone rang sometime past midnight. Was Ethan, of course, probably realizing I'd left without a fight, without a scream, without begging him to stay, and he said, "Did you make it back? I'll come home this weekend so we can finalize things." And just like that, the man who used to whisper "I love you" into my hair every morning now spoke of our marriage like an expired lease, and when he hung up, I stared at the black screen for a long time, wondering when exactly I became someone so easy to discard. The next morning, I didn't go home either. I went back to Mercy General Hospital and made an appointment to terminate the pregnancy, because what kind of mother would I be bringing a baby into this mess? A baby he never wanted and never would love. And the nurse was kind. She asked if I was okay, and I said I was fine. But when I got back to the car, the tears came all at once, my body shaking as I clutched the steering wheel and screamed into the silence, because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. I did everything right, didn't I? I stood by him when he moved for work. I supported him when he said it was for our future. I gave up nights and weekends and holidays and handled everything back home alone: our mortgage, our parents' hospital visits, the constant pressure to have kids, and he repaid me with betrayal and a girl barely out of college who probably thought love was cute coffee dates and rooftop kisses. I had bled for this marriage, cried in silence, begged the universe for one chance. And now that chance was sleeping in the same bed we bought together, under the same sheets I once picked out on a rainy afternoon, and all I got in return was a divorce and the illusion of compensation. Still, I didn't call my parents. Didn't tell my friends. I kept it all in, telling myself I'd handle it, because I wasn't about to let Ethan Carter's selfish midlife romance define me. No, if he wanted to throw away a decade of love for a spark, I'd let him burn, and when the ashes settled, he'd see exactly what he lost. But first, I had to survive the week. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was how easy it was for Ethan to erase me like I'd been nothing more than a footnote in his pursuit of some wild, passionate love story. Like 10 years of memories and sacrifices could be brushed off with a few rehearsed lines and a signature on a divorce agreement. And the more I replayed his words in my head, "We're better off this way, you deserve more. Chloe makes me feel alive," the more I wanted to laugh, not out of humor, but out of sheer disbelief at how cliché he had become, like a walking script of every cheating husband in a bad soap opera. After my abortion appointment was set for Wednesday, I drove around aimlessly before heading to my parents' place, only to stop halfway and turn around. I couldn't face them, not with my body aching and my soul hollowed out, so I went home, to what used to be our home, now stripped of everything that felt like mine. And for the first time I noticed how Ethan had quietly removed every trace of me, from the framed wedding photo that once sat proudly on the mantel to my pajamas that used to be folded at the foot of the bed. Even my vanilla-scented lotion was gone from the bathroom counter, like I was never there at all. I turned off my phone, curled up on the couch, and let the silence wrap around me until the doorbell rang. It was Helen and Thomas, Ethan's parents, arms full of groceries, smiling as if nothing had happened, telling me they brought my favorite pork ribs and seaweed soup because they missed me and had a feeling I might be lonely, and something in my chest cracked because they didn't know, not yet, and I didn't have the heart to tell them their perfect son had traded his vows for a younger model. After dinner, I locked myself in the bedroom, their voices muffled behind the door, and I stared at the ceiling thinking about Ethan's words from that night. "Ava, you've changed. You're always counting pennies, always planning every detail. You've become exhausting." And I wanted to scream, because wasn't that the whole point? To be responsible? To be the grown-up while he chased promotions and career moves? I managed our finances, paid off our mortgage early, negotiated with contractors, planned family holidays, handled hospital bills for both our parents, and never once asked him to lift a damn finger. And now, somehow, that made me too much? Too heavy? Too practical? He said Chloe was spontaneous, sweet, easily amused, the kind of girl who'd giggle over a cupcake and cry during puppy videos, and maybe that was what he wanted now, a low-maintenance fantasy who didn't remind him of real life. But what about the girl he used to love, the one who skipped lunch to save for his birthday, who stayed up late to help him polish his resume, who pretended to understand sports so she could cheer him on at company softball games? That was me, and now I was apparently a burden he couldn't bear. I stayed quiet through the weekend, ignoring calls and texts. Even my best friend Haley couldn't reach me, but Sunday morning I finally answered when she showed up at my door holding 2 coffees and a grocery bag full of chocolate and face masks, and when she saw my face, swollen from crying and pale from everything else, She didn't say a word, just pulled me into a hug and whispered, "Screw him, Ava. Seriously, screw him, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to sob into someone's shoulder who didn't judge me or tell me to be the bigger person. That night, Ethan called again, voice clipped and annoyed, asking why I hadn't responded, saying he wanted to come home next weekend to finalize the divorce and reminded me not to tell either set of parents yet because there's no point causing drama. I almost laughed into the receiver, but bit my tongue, hung up instead, and started planning, not for him, but for me. The next morning I met with a lawyer, Haley's cousin, Oliver, and laid everything out, including the promise Ethan had made on our wedding day, a handwritten loyalty agreement. He read aloud in front of friends and family, promising that if he ever cheated, everything, house, car, saving would be mine, no contest, and he even sealed it with his damn thumbprint, all caught on video. Oliver raised his brows, impressed, and asked if I had any additional proof of the affair, and I told him I had audio recordings, photos, and screenshots. Thank you, Chloe, for being a braggy little show-off who posted every overpriced gift Ethan bought her on social media with captions like, "He loves me more than words," and "True love is silent but obvious," which made it laughably easy to compile a digital folder of receipts, tagged photos, and hotel check-ins. Oliver said it was strong, that it might not be airtight, but it gave me leverage, and that if Ethan wanted this to be clean and quiet, he'd likely fold. If we pushed hard enough and I wanted to, oh God, I wanted to, not just for the money or the property, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't scared of what life looked like without Ethan Carter. The abortion, when it finally happened, was quick, clinical, and far sadder than I expected. Me mom flew in the day after she found out from a mutual family friend at the hospital who had somehow seen my file, and even though she didn't say much, I saw the look on her face when I told her everything, and it was equal parts heartbreak and fury, like she couldn't believe she'd watched me bend myself into knots for a man who would trade me for someone younger the second things got hard. When I got back from the hospital, my dad had already arrived. And suddenly our apartment was full of people who actually gave a damn about mem cooking, Dad fixing a broken hinge on the kitchen cabinet, and me sitting on the couch in sweatpants, trying to feel human again. But of course, Ethan's mom called that evening, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe, apologizing over and over and saying, "Ava, please, I didn't raise him to be this way, I swear. Please don't give up on him." And I wanted to believe her, but how could I? The man she raised didn't just cheer that chose it, he protected it, and when I asked Ethan directly later that week when it started, he didn't even flinch, just looked me dead in the eye and said, "It doesn't matter anymore, Ava. I don't love you, I love her." Like I was some old chapter he was finally closing. Still, I held my head high when I packed up his belongings, called a moving truck, and had every box sent to the condo he was staying at with Chloe, and when he called that night screaming, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I simply replied, "Nothing. Ethan, I am just giving you the fresh start you wanted so badly," and hung up. The next day I changed the locks, installed a smart doorbell with a camera, and made sure every trace of him was gone. That weekend he came back with Chloe in tow, ringing the bell like he was entitled to something, and when I answered from the intercom, he lost it, demanding I let him in because we're still married, Ava. To which I said, "Exactly. So why the hell did you bring your mistress here?" And Haley, sitting beside me during my spa appointment, gave me the biggest thumbs up I'd ever seen. Later that week, we met at Bluebird Cafe to discuss the divorce paperwork, pushed a neatly printed agreement across the table, and told me to review it. Said he'd let his lawyer know if I had any edits, acting like this was just business. Like I was some ex-employee signing an exit form, and when I looked him dead in the eyes and asked, "Do you remember what you promised me before we got married?" he didn't even blink, just sighed and said, "Ava, let's not drag this out. It's over. Just sign it and we can both move on." And I realized then how far gone he truly was, so I reached into my purse, pulled out a copy of his own handwritten promise, and laid it on the table, watching his smug expression flicker for the first time since this mess began. "You wrote this, Ethan. You said if you ever cheated, everything would be mine. And now I'm just making sure you keep your word, I said, calmly, watching as his face flushed crimson and his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might snap in that moment. I didn't feel heartbroken or bitter. I felt clarity, and it was glorious. Ethan didn't say a word at first, just stared at the paper like it was some ancient relic unearthed from a past he was hoping no one would ever remember, and maybe in his head. That promise he wrote in messy black ink on the morning of our wedding right before he stood in front of everyone we loved and read it out loud like a sacred vow was never meant to actually mean anything. Just sentimental fluff to impress a girl who believed in forever, but I remembered every single word, and when I pulled out a second sheet, the printed transcript of what he said into the mic that day, about how if he ever cheated, every penny would be mine, how he'd walk away with nothing. I saw the exact moment it hit him that I wasn't bluffing, that I wasn't going to settle for 50-50 like some docile ex-wife desperate to be civil, because I wasn't civil anymore. I was done being soft and sweet and endlessly forgiving, and when he finally opened his mouth, all he could muster was a bitter little scoff. You're really gonna be that petty, Ava? And I tilted my head, smiled calmly, and said, "It's not petty, it's legal," and the look on his face was nothing short of priceless. It was the first time I saw him truly shaken since this whole disaster started. The first time he didn't look smug or superior or smugly superior, and when he muttered, "This is exactly why I left, because you're always keeping score," I just raised a brow and asked, "And you think screwing someone behind my back doesn't count as a score to keep?" To which he had no reply, just that tight jaw and that flare in his nostrils that used to mean he was about to storm out and sulk somewhere until I chased after him. But this time I didn't chase. I sipped my coffee and let the silence simmer while he stewed in the reality of the consequences he never thought he'd face. I think part of him expected me to roll over, to cry and beg, or at least make a dramatic scene, but I gave him nothing, just paperwork, cold facts, and that very real, legally relevant promise he never should have written if he didn't mean it. When he stood up and walked out, he didn't say goodbye, just left the contract on the table and slammed the door behind him like a teenage boy punished for skipping curfew. And I waited until he was gone before pulling out my phone and forwarding the updated terms to Oliver, my lawyer, who responded within minutes. "He's going to fight it, but we have more than enough leverage. Sit tight." And I did, though I'll admit, it took everything in me not to scream when Ethan started dodging calls from Oliver and dragging his feet on every filing like some petulant brat who'd been told no for the first time in his life. Meanwhile, Chloe was clearly feeling the pressure because she made the mistake of texting Maze, "I know who you are." "No, I don't care." "Love wins, Ava. You just lost yours." And it took all the strength I had not to reply with screenshots of every receipt I'd collected, every photo of them together timestamped, while he was still telling me he was working late or out of town. Instead, I sent it all straight to Oliver and blocked her number, because I wasn't about to waste time arguing with a girl who thought sleeping with a married man made her the main character. It's cute when mistresses think they're heroines, really, but I had bigger things to focus on, like court filings, financial documentation, and keeping my damn sanity intact. During this time, Ethan's parents kept showing up at my door, and even though I knew they had a key, they never used it again after I changed the locks. They rang the bell, waited patiently, brought soup and fruit and warm little containers of comfort, and never once asked me to take Ethan back, which surprised me more than anything. Instead, Helen would just hug me, cry a little, say she was sorry over and over again, and Thomas, the stoic, retired military man, would squeeze my shoulder and mutter something like, "You did right," before leaving again with his head low, and I couldn't help but wonder if they regretted how proud they used to be of Ethan. If they saw now what I'd spent so long trying to ignore. The day of the first court hearing, Ethan strutted in wearing a tailored suit like he was auditioning for a lawyer show on TV, and when he saw Chloe sitting in the audience, he smiled at her like she was some trophy he'd won instead of the reason he was about to lose everything. And honestly, I felt nothing, no jealousy, no rage, no lingering heartbreak, just a cool detachment that made it almost fun to watch him squirm as Oliver presented the evidence. The recording of Ethan's own words from our wedding echoing through the courtroom speakers like poetic justice, the photos, the texts, the receipts, and most damning of all, the smug captions Chloe had publicly posted about their secret love. Ethan's lawyer tried to argue that the handwritten promise wasn't enforceable, that it wasn't a binding contract, but the judge leaned forward, replayed the wedding video again, and said, "Mr. Carter, these were your exact words, in a room full of witnesses, under no coercion." That may not make it a traditional contract, but it certainly makes it relevant, and that was the moment Ethan lost all color in his face, while Chloe slouched in her seat like a balloon deflating in slow motion. Eventually, the court ruled in my favor, of course it did, and I was awarded full ownership of the house, the car, the majority of our shared savings, and every asset we'd accumulated over our 6 years of marriage. Because while Ethan was out falling in love with someone else, I was the one holding our life together, documenting everything, protecting myself the way women learn to do when the world keeps moving the goalposts. As we were leaving the courthouse, Ethan's parents approached me with a check and a tearful apology, saying, "This isn't a bribe, Ava, it's just, we're so sorry." And when I hesitated, Thomas gently pressed it into my hand and added, "He doesn't deserve you, but you deserve this." And I cried for the first time in weeks, not for Ethan, not for our broken marriage, but for the people who didn't abandon me just because their son did. Ethan, meanwhile, was fuming on the courthouse steps, muttering something to Chloe, who clearly wasn't thrilled that her fairy tale had come with a price tag, and I watched as she stepped away from him, arms crossed, eyes rolling, and I knew then it was only a matter of time before she'd be gone too, because love built on betrayal never survives, no matter how many Instagram quotes you slap on it. Later that night, he called me, angry and bitter, accusing me of being cold-hearted, money-hungry, manipulative, and I let him rant, let him spit every insult he could think of until he finally stopped for breath, and I said calmly, "You wanted to be free, Ethan. Now you are. Enjoy it." And I hung up, blocked his number, and deleted every photo I still had of us from my cloud storage. The next morning, I woke up to the sun on my face, the sound of birds, and for the first time in a long time, my body didn't feel heavy. My heart didn't ache, and I realized something so freeing it almost made me laugh. I didn't miss him, not even a little. By the time Ethan dragged himself back into the picture, it was already too late. Not that I expected anything else, but there's still something wildly satisfying about watching a man try to put a fire out with gasoline and not understand why he's getting burned. Because after the court ruled in my favor and the papers were signed, I thought that would be the end of it, that I'd finally have the closure I deserved. But no, he just couldn't resist squeezing in one final act of pathetic self-delusion. And what really made it funny was how textbook it was, exactly what you'd expect from someone who chased a girl half his age, lost everything, and then realized passion doesn't pay the bills and infatuation doesn't clean up the mess. It started with a text the week after the ruling, just a casual "Hey, can we talk?" Like we were old friends catching up over coffee instead of ex-spouses whose last interaction was him calling me petty and materialistic. While I calmly reminded him that I was simply holding him accountable for his own promises, and I ignored it, obviously, because what was left to say? But then he showed up in person, standing in front of the government office where we finalized the car transfer. Yes, the one he was legally ordered to hand over to me instead of handing over the keys like a grown adult. He tried to make it emotional, said, "Ava, if I told you I regret it all, would you believe me?" And I blinked at him, genuinely stunned by the audacity of a man who thought a last-minute confession could somehow erase 10 years of betrayal, a baby lost, and a courtroom full of lies. "No, Ethan," I said, "but I believe you're miserable." That part's easy to see, and that wiped the hopeful smirk right off his face, which honestly felt better than winning any settlement. He looked rough, like regret had finally caught up to him, dark circles under his eyes, 5 o'clock shadow not doing him any favors. And that signature smug confidence noticeably cracked, and part of me wanted to feel something for him, anything, but all I felt was relief, like dodging a bullet I didn't even know was loaded until it had already grazed my ribs. And of course, Chloe wasn't with him surprise because rumor had it she dipped out the minute she realized Ethan's bank account had taken a nosedive and that she wasn't the Disney princess in the story, just the temporary plot twist. And the irony of it all was so rich I wanted to bottle it up and sell it as perfume. Still, he handed over the car keys like a sore loser at a poker table, muttering something about how I won, as if this had been a game to me, and I almost told him, "You lost the second you chose her," but I didn't waste the breath, just took the keys, turned around, and walked straight into Haley's waiting car, where she burst out laughing and said, "God," his face looked like someone made him eat plain oatmeal for life. And I couldn't stop laughing either, because she wasn't wrong. It was like the final scene of a long, painful movie, and I finally got the exit I wanted, not with tears or second guesses, but with pride, control, and a brand new set of car papers in my name. The following week, I got a call from Oliver, my lawyer, telling me that Ethan's team had officially dropped their appeal, probably after realizing they had zero legal ground to stand on and the public embarrassment wasn't worth the uphill battle. And he congratulated me with this little chuckle in his voice, like he was genuinely impressed with how I handled the whole thing, which felt good, not because I needed the validation, but because someone saw how hard I fought for my dignity without turning into someone bitter or cruel, just a woman who refused to be taken for granted again. I celebrated by booking a spa day with Haley and letting my phone go on Do Not Disturb for 24 hours, soaking in eucalyptus-scented steam and thinking about how a few months ago I was crying in my car with a sonogram photo in the glove box, and now I was here stronger, sharper, and finally breathing without that constant weight on my chest. I should have known it wouldn't stay quiet for long, though, because Ethan's mom, bless her heart, called me crying again a few days later, but this time it wasn't about him, it was about me. She'd heard through a mutual friend at the hospital that I'd gone through the procedure alone, that I was recovering in silence while the world kept spinning, and she kept saying over and over, "I'm so sorry, Ava. I would have gone with you. I swear I didn't know." And I believe her, I do, because Helen is many things, but cruel isn't one of them. And I think a part of her always saw me as the daughter she never had, which made this all harder in ways I couldn't even explain. But I thanked her, told her I was okay, and meant it, because I was, for the first time in a long time, really, truly okay, that weekend. My parents came to stay with me, bringing all the warmth and chaos that only retired suburban parents could bring me. Mom reorganized my pantry like it was a mission from God, and my dad insisted on checking every light switch like we hadn't just replaced all the fixtures last summer, and I let them, because it was nice to feel taken care of without strings attached, without pretending everything was fine just to keep the peace. They didn't ask too many questions, just sat with me on the balcony at night, sipping tea and watching the city lights flicker while my dad said, "You've always been the brave one," and my mom nodded like that was the most obvious thing in the world, and I almost cried again, not from pain, but from gratitude. Because even when love fails, family doesn't. Somewhere around midnight that Sunday, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Chloe, of all people, and all it said was, "You won. Congrats," followed by a thumbs-up emoji, and I almost dropped my phone from laughing, because what even was that? A sarcastic trophy? A surrender flag? An attempt to bait me into a fight? I didn't reply, obviously, but I took a screenshot and sent it to Haley, who responded with, "LOL, imagine still being the side piece even after the main dish left the restaurant," and that about summed it up. In the weeks that followed, the story faded from everyone's radar except mine, Ethan's, and probably Chloe's too, because while I moved on, filed documents, scheduled therapy, and built my life brick by brick again, Ethan didn't. I heard through the grapevine that he tried to move into a smaller apartment his parents offered him, but then got into a screaming match with his dad, who apparently called him an embarrassment to the Carter name, which honestly fair, and as for Chloe, she allegedly moved out, started working at some startup in a neighboring city, and removed all traces of Ethan from her Instagram except for one post she forgot to delete, a photo of a Cartier bracelet he bought her, which now served as a hilarious little monument to her brief reign as queen of nothing. By the time my court-ordered asset transfers were complete, I had everything I needed, not just legally, but emotionally, because I wasn't just free of Ethan, I was free of the version of myself who thought enduring pain was the same thing as being loyal. Who thought love meant sacrificing until there was nothing left, and that version of me? She was finally gone. I didn't hate Ethan, not anymore, but I also didn't pity him, because people like him always think the grass is greener, and by the time they realize it's just astroturf, the real garden is already thriving somewhere else. And I was that garden now blooming, brilliant, and done watering dead things. You would think that after all of that, the betrayal, the divorce, the courtroom drama, the asset transfer, things would finally settle, but no. Apparently peace is a luxury only awarded to men like Ethan Carter, who ruin lives and walk away confused as to why the world doesn't revolve around their midlife crises, because just when I thought I could breathe again, just when I thought I could fully focus on healing and moving forward, his chaos came knocking again, not directly this time, but in the form of his mother showing up at my door with tears in her eyes and guilt weighing down her every breath, clutching a small envelope and a Tupperware of homemade soup like it could undo the mess her son created, and part of me wanted to shut the door right there. But another part, the part that still remembered Sunday mornings with pancakes and her stories about raising Ethan alone while his father was deployed, couldn't do it, so I let her in, and she sat at my kitchen table like she always used to, wringing her hands and apologizing over and over, not for herself, but for him, saying she had no idea how far things had gone, that she blamed herself for not noticing the signs, and that she'd raised him to be better than this. And I didn't have the heart to tell her that sometimes love isn't enough to undo selfishness, sometimes kindness and discipline and good parenting get overridden by pure, unfiltered ego, but I thanked her anyway, because I knew she was suffering in a way that was uniquely painful, watching your child become someone you can't even defend anymore. And as she stood to leave, she handed me the envelope and said, "It's yours, from us, just something to help with the next chapter." And I opened it later to find a check more than generous, almost offensive, but I knew it came from a place of love, not guilt, and when I returned it a few days later, showing up at their place in the suburbs unannounced, I handed it back with a tight smile and said, "You already gave me everything I needed, your support," and that was the truth. I didn't want Ethan's parents' money, I just wanted my own peace, my own closure, and they respected that, hugged me one last time, and as I left, I heard Helen call out, "Don't be a stranger." And I promised I wouldn't, even though we both knew it would never be the same again. Things finally did get quiet after that, like the final note of a song that's been playing too loud for too long, and I found myself adjusting to silence, to waking up alone without dread, to going to work and not constantly checking my phone, to evenings that weren't spent planning around someone else's schedule. And it was weird at first, I won't lie, the stillness of it, the sheer autonomy. But I started to fill the spaces with things that made sense again: weekly brunches with Haley, Pilates classes, therapy sessions that felt more like exorcisms, and the occasional spontaneous solo trip to the coast, just to breathe salt air and feel small in the best possible way. People kept asking if I'd started dating again, and I'd laugh and say, "I'm still detoxing from the last emotional parasite. Give me a minute," which always earned a mix of pity and applause, but the truth was I wasn't ready. Not because I still loved Ethan, God no, but because I just spent 10 years building my life around a man who saw me as a stepping stone, and now I wanted to build something for myself, no strings, no compromises, just Ava Bennett, unfiltered and unapologetic. I dove into my career, took on bigger projects, pitched bolder ideas, started saying no to clients who undervalued me, and yes to opportunities one used to think I wasn't good enough for, and somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about Ethan altogether until one day, while grabbing coffee downtown, I ran into someone who froze me mid-step, Chloe Morgan, standing by the counter, alone, holding her phone like it was the last shred of dignity she had. And when she saw me, her entire face shifted: shame, resentment, something like defeat all rolled into one, and I almost walked past her without saying a word, but she beat me to it, muttering, "So I guess you got everything you wanted," and I blinked, stunned, then smiled, the slow satisfied kind of smile that people like her never understand, and I replied, "No, Chloe, I just stopped wanting things that weren't mine to begin with," and walked away, coffee in hand, spine straight, heart light, and as I pushed the door open and stepped into the sun, I heard her scoff behind me, but I didn't turn around because people like her only exist to teach women like me how to rise. What surprised me more than seeing her, though, was what happened next, because less than a week later, Ethan showed up at my building, and this time he didn't have that smug arrogance or angry desperation in his eyes, just something hollow, broken, and, honestly, it was jarring, because this man who once stood tall and confident now looked like he'd been dragged through every single bad decision he ever made, and when he asked if we could talk, I didn't say no, but I didn't invite him in either. We stood outside by the mailbox, awkward and exposed, and he said, "I was wrong, Ava." Like that was supposed to mean something, like that was enough to reverse time, and I raised an eyebrow and asked, "About what? Leaving? Lying? Or thinking Chloe was your soulmate?" And he flinched, actually flinched, which was the first time I saw real vulnerability in him since before the affair, and he said, "All of it. I didn't know how good I had it. You were everything. I just didn't see it until it was gone," and I tilted my head, letting the silence stretch just enough to make him squirm before replying, "You saw it, Ethan. You just didn't care," and that hit him like a truck because it was the truth. Seeing me crying over our fertility struggles, managing our lives alone, holding up our marriage with bare hands while he daydreamed about cupcakes and carefree girls. And he'd chosen not to care. He tried to defend himself, of course, said things like, "I was overwhelmed, and I felt like I was drowning, but I wasn't in the mood to give him a life raft. Not anymore." So I told him flat out, we were both drowning. Ethan. The difference is I didn't use someone else as a flotation device, and the way his face fell was almost poetic. He stood there for another minute, like he was waiting for something, forgiveness, maybe, or a hug, or some sign that he hadn't completely destroyed everything. But when it didn't come, he finally muttered, "I hope you're happy," and I smiled, soft and real, and said, "I am," and this time I meant it with every fiber of my being, because I was. Even if healing was messy and nonlinear and sometimes lonely, I was still happier than I ever was when I was bending over backwards to be enough for a man who never truly saw me. After he left, I went upstairs, locked the door, and cried, not because I missed him, but because I had finally, completely, truly let him go. That night, Haley and I opened a bottle of wine and toasted to bad exes, good lawyers, and second chances, and I told her, "It's weird, right? To survive something that tried so hard to break you." And she grinned and said, "You didn't just survive it, you turned it into your origin story." And she was right, because this wasn't the end for me, not even close. It was the beginning. The part where the heroine rises from the ashes not to beg for love, but to build something better on her own terms. They say closure is a myth, that some wounds never heal clean, that you just learn to live around the scar, but whoever said that clearly never watched a man who used to think the world revolved around him crumble under the weight of his own decisions. Because after Ethan left that night with my quiet, final "I am happy" ringing in his ears, something shifted, not just in him, but in me, like the last door had finally shut, the last page turned, and for once I wasn't left standing there wondering if I should have said more, fought harder, stayed longer, because I knew, in every part of me, that I had done enough, given enough, loved enough, and his failure to meet me there had nothing to do with my worth and everything to do with his cowardice. And that realization was the kind of freedom people spend years chasing in therapy, the kind that doesn't come with balloons or a neatly wrapped resolution, just a quiet peace that settles deep in your bones. After that, I didn't think about him as often became background noise, like static on a radio you eventually tune out, and I started saying yes to things I used to postpone, like traveling solo to New York just because I could, enrolling in a photography course I'd always been curious about, even signing up for a local charity gala where I wore a dress so stunning Haley literally gasped when she saw me and said, "Ethan would pass out if he saw you right now," to which I replied, "Good thing he's not invited to my glow up," and we Laughed like the world was finally in our hands again. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, unfiltered, real, and full of little joys I used to miss while waiting for someone else to validate me. And then one day, something wild happened. I got a call from Oliver, my lawyer, telling me that Ethan had filed an official statement with the court attempting to reverse a section of our asset agreement, claiming emotional duress and an unfair settlement, and I couldn't help it burst out laughing. Right there in my office, loud enough for my coworkers to peek over their cubicles and check if I'd lost my mind. But honestly, it was hilarious, because not only had the man already signed off on everything with a smug little flourish, but we also had audio, video, written agreements. And witness us, it was like watching someone walk into a wall they built themselves and act surprised when their nose broke. Oliver assured me it wouldn't go anywhere, that it was just a last-ditch ego move. And he was right. Emotion was thrown out almost immediately, but still, it was poetic, and it reminded me just how deeply some men hate losing control, especially to women who were never supposed to fight back. And I felt proud, not because I won in court, but because I never let him convince me to play small, never gave him the satisfaction of watching me break down. And when I thought about that version of myself, the one who once tiptoed around his moods, who worried if being too successful would bruise his ego, who buried her own pain for the sake of being the cool wife, I almost wanted to write her a letter and say, "You made it, babe. He didn't destroy you. You saved yourself." A few months after that legal hiccup, Haley dragged me to a networking event I didn't want to attend, the kind with too many hors d'oeuvres and not enough oxygen, but I went anyway, mostly for the wine. And that's where I met someone new, not in a rom-com kind of way, not with violins playing or glasses clinking, but in the quiet, organic way that only happens when you're not looking, and his name was Julian. And he didn't sweep me off my feet or promise to fix me, he just listened, really listened, and made me laugh in a way that felt different than before. Not performative, not desperate, just honest. We didn't dive into anything fast, hell no. I made that mistake once, but we started having coffee, then brunch. Then late-night phone calls where neither of us filled the silence out of obligation, and one night, months later, while we sat on my balcony watching the city lights blink like distant fireflies, he asked, "Does it ever feel like your life finally caught up to your soul?" And I looked at him and said, "It does now," and meant every syllable. I didn't need him, but I liked him, and that was the difference, because I had rebuilt my world with my own hands, and anyone who entered it now was a guest, not an architect. And as we eased into something real, something new, I noticed how different it felt. No walking on eggshells, no proving my worth, no second-guessing every text or worrying if he was looking at someone else. Just mutual respect, slow trust, and the kind of emotional maturity I once thought only existed in therapy handouts. Around that same time, I ran into Helen again, Ethan's mom, at a community art fair of all places, and we hugged like no time had passed. And she told me that she and Thomas had finally retired for real, moved to their lake house full-time, and that Ethan was well, surviving. Apparently, Chloe had officially left him, and he was still trying to pick up whatever pieces he had left. And for a second, I almost felt battlemost, but then Helen said something that stayed with me. Some people only learn when everything is gone. And even then, it might be too late, and I nodded, not because I wished him harm, but because I finally accepted that his choices were never mine to carry. The final moment that cemented everything for me came weeks later, when I got a letter in the mail, not from Ethan, but from his sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, and in it she wrote, "Ava, I know we were never close, but I just wanted you to know I always admired how strong you were. I wish I had your courage back then." And I read it twice, maybe 3 times, before folding it up and tucking it into the back of a journal I no longer wrote pain into. And that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, looked at myself in the mirror, and saw someone I hadn't seen in a very long time, a woman who didn't flinch at her reflection, who didn't apologize for existing too loudly or loving too deeply, who had been through hell and built a home from the ashes. And I smiled, slow and full and real, because this was the ending I deserved, not dramatic, not explosive, just steady and whole in mine. So yeah, maybe closure isn't a myth after all. Maybe it's not a door slamming shut or a grand finale, but a quiet decision you make over and over until it finally sticks, until you wake up one day and realize you're free, and you didn't just survive the storm. You learned how to dance in the damn rain, and if Ethan ever wonders what became of me, if he ever sits alone and rewatches our wedding video or stumbles across one of my photos online and feels something twist in his chest, I hope he knows it's not regret that burns, it's recognition. The cruel clarity that the woman he once had, the life he once held, was never replaceable. Only lost, and as for me, I'll be exactly where I am now, thriving, laughing too loud, loving too wisely, and building a life so beautiful no one could ever imagine it was born from heartbreak.